There is something inside you that has never once surrendered, and you have been walking past it every single day of your life. Not every truth announces itself loudly. Some of the most important realizations arrive quietly in the space between breaths, in the stillness after a long day when the noise finally ceases, and something deeper than your thoughts begins to speak. That something is older than your fears. It has been with you through every failure, every loss, every moment you were certain you could not endure. And yet, here you are, still functioning, still choosing, still capable of receiving and applying what you are about to hear. Most people spend their lives measuring themselves against the wrong standards, against what others have built, against what they were told they should have accomplished by a certain age, against a version of success designed for someone else entirely. And in that constant measuring, they miss the one truth that could liberate them, that the life they have been chasing is already rooted in who they are. The Stoics understood something that modern culture has largely forgotten. Strength is not loudness. Power is not performance. The deepest form of transformation is not visible from the outside. It happens in the quiet hours, in the private decisions, in the moments when you could have quit and simply did not. And those moments, the unwitnessed ones, the ones with no audience, no reward, those are doing more to shape who you are than any achievement with applause attached. You are about to understand why those quiet moments are the ones that matter most, and what it means that you have already survived every single one of them. What is doubt at its core? Not the surface anxiety before a difficult conversation. Trace deeper. Doubt the kind that settles into the chest and makes you question whether you are worth the effort you put into yourself. Where does that actually come from? It does not come from weakness. It comes from distance. Distance between who you are right now and the version of yourself you once knew before the world began editing you, before someone told you to be smaller, before you learned that standing out sometimes meant getting hurt, before you understood that hope, held too openly, could be used against you. You were not born second-guessing yourself. That was learned behavior. Hesitation was taught to you gradually, through repeated corrections, through moments where ambition was treated as arrogance and confidence was treated as threat. That was never about your actual capacity. That was about the discomfort of the people around you. And that distinction, when you genuinely absorb it, changes everything. Because it means the limits you accepted were never yours. They were borrowed limits, assigned at a time when you had no ability to question their origin. But here is what that conditioning could never reach: the part of you that kept moving forward regardless. The version of you that got out of bed on the mornings when getting up felt impossible. The version that kept functioning while quietly carrying weight no one fully saw. The version that found a path through circumstances with no clean solution and no guaranteed outcome. You have been doing extraordinary things in ordinary conditions. And you have been dismissing every piece of that evidence. If you applied the same rigorous skepticism to your self-doubt that you apply to your confidence, the whole calculation would shift. Aristotle wrote that we become what we repeatedly do. Excellence is not a single action, but a habit, a pattern of behavior that compounds across time and eventually becomes identity. Most people hear that and think only of bad habits. But look in the other direction. Look at what you have repeatedly done, not the performances, the private, consistent ones. The mornings you chose effort when rest was justified. The conversations where you stayed when withdrawal would have been easier. The times you chose honesty when a comfortable distortion was right there waiting. Those choices did not vanish. They became structure, the invisible architecture of the person you have been quietly building, not loudly, not with documentation, but with the only currency that compounds into genuine character, consistent private behavior over time. Carl Jung observed that until the unconscious is made conscious, it will continue directing your life while you mistake its influence for fate. The patterns you have accepted as permanent, the ceilings you have stopped questioning, these may not belong to you. They may be inherited conclusions, passed down from someone who was also afraid, who also accepted limits they never examined. So whose voice is actually speaking when it tells you that you are not ready, and does it deserve the authority you have been giving it? Trace the origin. Because once you locate the source of a limiting belief, you weaken its grip. It was never the voice of truth. It was someone else's unexamined fear, now occupying space at the center of your mind, rent-free, unchallenged. Treated as resident authority on what you are capable of, when it has never actually seen what you are capable of. This is where the Stoics offer something practical. You are not your thoughts. You are the one who observes them, the witness, not the verdict. That distinction matters more than any motivational phrase ever could. Because if you are the thinker and not the thought, you retain editorial authority. You do not have to accept every narrative your mind generates. You can examine it, trace its origin, decide which thoughts earn the right to shape your behavior and which ones get acknowledged and released. Marcus Aurelius practiced this daily, not as philosophical exercise, but as practical governance. Managing an empire required managing his own responses first. He wrote constantly about the relationship between perception and reality, between the event itself and the meaning assigned to it. That internal narration, the story you tell yourself about what has happened, that is where the real work lives. You have power over your interpretation, even when the external situation offers none. And that is not a small consolation prize. In the Stoic framework, that is the whole game. The entire territory of genuine human freedom lives in that gap between what happens and what you decide it means. Let us talk about something that quietly corrodes more people than almost anything else. Ambient comparison. Not the deliberate kind where you weigh options with clear eyes. The automatic kind that activates the moment you see evidence of another person's achievement or milestone. The kind that converts someone else's edited presentation into a verdict about your own worth. Comparison does not announce itself honestly. It arrives wearing motivation's clothes, but watch what it actually does over time. It takes the chapter you are currently living and holds it against someone else's finished book, your unfiltered process measured against their most publishable result. Your honest, imperfect, ongoing work made irrelevant against a backdrop of selected highlights. What if the competition you believe you are losing was never designed to include you? Epictetus was precise. Freedom is cultivated by releasing attachment to what lies outside your control. Another person's progress carries no information about your own trajectory. Their timeline was shaped by variables you do not have access to, just as your path was shaped by circumstances they will never understand. Aristotle introduced the concept of telos, the unique end toward which each person's nature is oriented. The problem is never failing to achieve someone else's purpose. It is neglecting your own. Trying to grow yourself according to a blueprint designed for someone else is not humility. It is self-abandonment dressed as reasonable modesty. The only competition that holds any meaning is with the version of yourself from yesterday. You are not behind. You are on a specific, irreplaceable path with a rhythm that belongs entirely to you. Progress on that path does not always appear dramatic. Some of the most important growth you have ever accomplished happened during the weeks that felt like nothing was moving, the quiet seasons of integration, the periods of rebuilding foundations. That invisible work counts. It is frequently the work that makes all the visible work possible. The season you spent rebuilding quietly was not wasted time. It was essential preparation. And the fact that it produced no shareable moment does not diminish what it built. What you actually need right now is not more motivation. Motivation, as a feeling, is inherently unstable. What you need outlasts feeling. You need memory. A clear, honest recollection of your own record, not the highlights, the ordinary evidence. Think back to the periods that should have ended you, the stretches where multiple significant things were wrong simultaneously. The times you carried more than any single person reasonably should, without announcement or applause, without anyone fully seeing the weight. You got through those periods, not because conditions improved overnight, because you kept moving even when they did not. That is resilience, not as inspiration but as verified fact about your character, and that fact does not expire. Resilience is not a historical footnote about who you used to be. It is a present-tense description of the person reading these words right now. The same architecture that carried you through those periods is carrying you through this one. Your most powerful evidence is not in your best days. It lives in the days you kept moving when nothing was working. Plato made a distinction worth keeping. Courage is not the elimination of fear, it is the correct understanding of what actually merits fear and what does not. It is a commitment to movement through honest uncertainty, choosing the next step before the complete picture is available because you have made peace with the understanding that it never fully will be. The people you most admire for their groundedness did not arrive there through luck alone. They built it in exactly the way you have been building yours, through small decisions made consistently in private, away from any audience, with no guarantee of recognition. Self-confidence in the Stoic tradition is not a precondition for action, it is a consequence. You do not locate confidence and then apply it. You build it by showing up, especially when showing up costs something. Every time you honor a commitment to yourself, despite having a reasonable excuse to break it, you add to a private internal record that says, I am someone I can count on, without witnesses, in the dark. That record becomes the foundation of confidence that requires no external maintenance. When the foundation of your confidence is private evidence, nothing outside of you can revoke it. Consider the mind directly, not as metaphor, but as the actual environment where your life is being built. Most suffering does not come from external events. It comes from the interpretation placed on those events. The meaning assigned in the gap between what happens and what you decide it means. Socrates committed his life to the principle that the unexamined life lacks real depth. He meant that operating on autopilot, accepting inherited assumptions, moving through patterns never consciously chosen, is a form of traveling your entire life on someone else's map. The most dangerous thoughts are not the dramatic ones. They are the quiet, repeated phrases that slip through unchallenged because they feel like neutral observation. I have never been particularly capable at this. It is probably too late. This kind of thing simply happens to me. These are not facts. They are sediment-accumulated interpretations whose authority quietly expired years ago. And the reason they still operate is not that they are true, it is simply that they have never been examined. No one held them up to the light and asked the straightforward, clarifying question, where did this come from? And does the source of this idea deserve the power I have given it over my daily choices? That is the examination Socrates was pointing toward. Not a dramatic confrontation, but a patient willingness to look at what is actually there and decide, consciously, whether it belongs. You have the capacity to become the deliberate gatekeeper of your own thinking, not through forced positivity, not by suppressing what is difficult, but by creating space to examine what is actually being processed. The Stoics called this prohairesis the faculty of reasoned choice, the inner territory that no external circumstance can enter without your permission. Marcus Aurelius returned to this constantly, not because it came naturally, but because it was the most reliable anchor available. Your mind is the one domain that belongs entirely to you, but only when you choose to govern it. Right. Not to impress yourself with the phrasing, but to see clearly what is present. Name the fears without softening them. Name the desires without apology. What you can observe clearly, you can work with. What remains formless in the dark continues to govern you from below. Clean your internal language, saying I cannot, and saying I have not yet produce entirely different outcomes. Language compounds. Choose it with awareness. Here is a pattern that traps people more reliably than almost anything, attaching personal worth directly to outcomes, the result of the project, the response to something created. When outcomes go well, the internal verdict is, I have value. When they do not, the verdict is, I do not. And life becomes a campaign to manufacture favorable results, just to sustain the belief that you matter. Marcus Aurelius did not evaluate himself against outcomes he could not control. He evaluated himself against the consistency of his own choices, whether his actions originated from integrity rather than impulse. He separated the quality of the process from the uncertainty of the result. That separation is not detachment from caring, it is the precise condition required for genuine peace. You are the effort, not its echo, the decision, not the outcome it produces. Epictetus built his entire philosophy around one insight: the distinction between what is within your power and what is not. Wishing for things to unfold according to your preferences creates chronic suffering. Wishing for the capacity to meet whatever unfolds with clarity and dignity, that is the path to genuine freedom. This is not passivity, it is precision. Real detachment is not emotional distance from what matters to you. You can care deeply and still refuse to let the result become the measure of your worth. You give everything, you commit fully. And then you release the result, not because you do not care, but because clinging to a specific outcome adds suffering without improving the odds. That is mastery. The kind of internal stability external events cannot easily dislodge. Real transformation does not arrive in dramatic moments. Culture is in love with the breakthrough scene, the moment when everything shifts and the person becomes who they needed to become. Growth rarely works that way. It looks like choosing, one more time, to do the harder, honest thing when the comfortable alternative was immediately available. A private conversation with yourself that no one else will ever know. One small, consistent action practiced across weeks until it becomes natural. Plato wrote that the greatest victory available to any person is the conquest of the self, not through domination or suppression, but through alignment. The gradual closing of the distance between who you know yourself to be at your clearest and who you are being when no one is watching. The version of yourself you are working toward is not in the future. It is being assembled right now, in the choices you make before anyone confirms they were right. Courage, understood that way, is rarely dramatic. Sometimes it looks like asking for what you actually need rather than pretending you require nothing. Sometimes it looks like ending a familiar pattern you have recognized as costly. Sometimes it simply looks like getting up again after the night that should have kept you down. Every time you act in genuine alignment with your actual values, not the ones you present publicly, but the ones that govern you when the stakes are real, you build something that cannot be purchased. The architecture of a self you can trust. Who are you in private? Not as a judgment, as a genuine inquiry. Who are you when observation carries no reward? What do you do with your attention when nothing measures it? Because the honest answer to that question tells you more about your actual values than any public declaration ever could. The choices that have no audience are the most truthful portrait of the person you are genuinely becoming. Self-respect is not assembled in moments of public success. It is built in the unobserved moments of alignment between what you value and how you actually behave. Socrates said the soul takes the color of its habitual thoughts, but it is also shaped by habitual choices, the ones made quietly when nothing external is at stake. The integrity you practice in private becomes the character that shows up everywhere else. The Stoic tradition asks something radical. Stop performing strength and begin being it. Stop maintaining the version of yourself that requires continuous external input to stay stable. Begin operating from a place so internally anchored that approval ceases to be a structural requirement. Not because you have become indifferent to people, but because your relationship with your own values is no longer conditional on their verdict. This is not coldness. This is the warm, grounded stability of a person who does not need to be reassured in order to keep showing up. Now, let us address ambition. Because somewhere in most people's histories, they were taught to be embarrassed by their own, to treat aspiration as evidence of selfishness. And so they learned to diminish it, to preface every desire with apologies for wanting more than what they currently have. Honest ambition rooted in genuine purpose, rather than ego, is not arrogance. It is alignment with your nature. Suppressing it does not create humility. It creates unavailability to the life you are actually capable of living. Real humility is not making yourself invisible. It is growing fully and sharing that growth with integrity. You were not made to disappear. You were made to contribute fully with your whole self. Socrates taught that finding yourself requires thinking for yourself, not inheriting conclusions or absorbing the consensus of people who never examined their own assumptions. Thinking for yourself means distinguishing between what you actually believe and what you have been told you should believe, between what genuinely aligns with your nature and what has become comfortable through repetition. Fear. Let us be direct. Fear is not the obstacle between you and growth. Fear is frequently the most accurate map of where growth is available. The things that genuinely frighten you are pointing toward the edges of your current self, the places where expansion is possible and therefore uncomfortable. Jung wrote that wherever your fear lives, your real task waits. The places you consistently avoid are the places that most need your attention, the conversations kept postponing, the truths not quite fully said, the decisions perpetually deferred. These avoidances are not protecting you from difficulty. They are maintaining the very constraints you most want to move beyond. The edge of your comfort is not the boundary of your capacity. It marks the beginning of it. Fear in the presence of something significant is evidence that you care enough for the stakes to feel real. That is useful information, so stop waiting to feel fearless before beginning. That feeling does not arrive as a precondition. It arrives, when it comes at all, as a consequence of having moved forward without it. You do not find courage first. You act, and through that movement you discover the courage was already present, waiting to be needed. Discipline has been distorted through cultural association into something punishing. That is not what the Stoics meant. Discipline, correctly understood, is liberation. The specific freedom that comes from being able to rely on yourself not just when conditions favor it, but when they do not. There is a particular kind of quiet confidence that develops only through discovering repeatedly that you showed up when you had every reasonable excuse not to. That confidence is not borrowed from external events. It belongs to you entirely. Motivation is a visitor. It arrives with enthusiasm and then departs, often at precisely the moment you most need it to stay. Discipline is what remains. The infrastructure beneath the inspiration, the practice that continues when the feeling disappears. And here is what that practice does over time. It restructures your relationship with yourself. Every day you show up without the support of motivation, you are proving to yourself that your commitment is not contingent on mood or circumstance. You are building a different kind of internal agreement, one that says, I am here because I said I would be, and that is sufficient reason. When you maintain consistent effort, even on the days it costs you rather than rewards you, you build evidence that your follow-through is independent of mood. Discipline is not what you do when you are motivated. It is what you do when you are not. Make your routines deliberate rather than rigid, consistent rather than perfect, because on the days when clarity has retreated and motivation belongs to a different person, your established practices will carry you forward regardless. They will demonstrate to yourself, in the only way that actually persuades, that you are someone who shows up without optimal conditions, and that demonstration, made repeatedly across time, is what genuine self-respect is built from. Readiness is not a state you inhabit before beginning. It is a state that emerges through beginning. The hesitation that feels like prudent caution is frequently the mind avoiding the discomfort of genuine uncertainty. Waiting until you feel fully prepared, that waiting has no natural conclusion, because those feelings do not arrive as prerequisites. They arrive, when they come, as consequences of having acted. Every person you have admired for their grounded, self-possessed quality began before they were ready. They moved into uncertainty before the path was clear. And through that movement, through beginning in the absence of guarantees, they became capable of the path they were on. Capability does not precede the attempt. It is constructed through it. You do not become ready and then begin. You begin, and in doing so, you become ready. The future version of you, the one who moves with purpose and acts from a stable internal foundation, is not in the distance waiting for right conditions. That person is being assembled now, in the choices made when nothing is certain, in the private moments of alignment no one observes, in every decision to keep going when stopping was entirely available. Jung wrote that the deepest privilege of a human life is to become who you actually are, not a more impressive version of someone else, not the person expected of you by those who did not fully see you. The genuine article discovered through honest engagement with your own experience, through the discipline of examining your actual life and making deliberate choices about its direction. You are not behind. Say that without qualification. You are not running late on a timeline that belongs to someone else. You are not failing a standard designed for a different person. You are on a path with its own pace, and every step, including the ones that felt like wrong turns, was building precisely the person capable of taking the next one. You are not arriving late. You are arriving when your path has prepared you to be here. You are not broken. The things that happened to you, the periods that cracked you, the stretches when you were uncertain you would make it, those did not destroy you. They shaped you. A thing that breaks becomes non-functional. A thing shaped through difficulty becomes more precisely what it was meant to be. And you are not beginning again. You never begin again. Every apparent setback, every recalibration you brought to it, everything learned from everything before, your capacity for endurance, your clarity about what genuinely matters, your hard-won knowledge of who you are when circumstances make that question impossible to avoid. That is not starting over. That is continuing from a deeper, more honest position than the one you held before the difficult period began. There is no experience you have lived through that did not deposit something useful into the person you are now, even the worst of it, especially the worst of it. Every season of difficulty adds a layer to the structure. Every period of uncertainty sharpens your understanding of what you are actually made of. The curriculum of your life has been preparing you for exactly the challenges that are in front of you now. Nothing was wasted, nothing was misapplied. Every experience was building exactly the competence you need for the next one. So here is what Stoic philosophy, stripped of historical distance, is actually asking of you. Not that you become unreachable by difficulty, not that you stop feeling the weight of heavy things. It is asking you to take seriously the one domain where your authority is complete, your response, your interpretation, your deliberate choice about what to do with what you have been given. Because how you meet this moment is building something. The attention you bring to your own life, the honesty with which you examine your patterns, the steadiness with which you act in alignment with your actual values, that is shaping the person who will meet every moment that follows. Every choice made in private assembles the self that meets everything else. And here is what the Stoics ultimately leave us. The strength you have been searching for was never external, not in the right teaching, not in perfect circumstances finally assembling themselves. It has always been here demonstrated, repeatedly, in the record of your own life. In every morning you began again after the night that should have kept you down. In every moment of quiet dignity no one witnessed except you. In every instance of private integrity that cost something and that you chose anyway. That is the foundation. Not the person you intend to become. The actual person you already are right now, who has already survived what they were uncertain they could survive. Who has already demonstrated what they claim not to have. Who is already, in the quietest and most meaningful ways, exactly who they have been working to become. The distance between where you are and where you want to be is smaller than the noise in your mind suggests. What remains is not a transformation. It is a recognition, a willingness to stop disqualifying the evidence of who you already are. Keep moving, not because someone is watching, not because the result is guaranteed, but because the version of you emerging through this quiet, unwitnessed work is worth showing up for every day. The strength accumulating in private is real. The character being built in the ordinary moments is real. The person becoming through all of this is not a future fantasy. They are you right now, one deliberate choice further along than before. If this reached something genuine in you, if something here landed in a place that was already waiting to receive it, do one thing now. Press like on this video and stay with us here at Stoic Sight. More than you might expect. That matters not only for this channel, but for the person who needs to find this conversation exactly when they need it most. There is another video waiting on this channel that takes everything discussed here one step further. Let it be your next step. We will see you there. And one more thing before you go. The ideas you encountered here about the examined mind, about private integrity, about building confidence through action rather than waiting for it to arrive, these are not concepts meant to be visited once and left behind. They are practices. Return to them. Let them work on you across time. The Stoic philosophers did not read Marcus Aurelius once and consider the work complete. They lived these ideas daily in the ordinary moments that add up to a life. That is the invitation here. Not to feel inspired for an afternoon and return to old patterns by morning. To actually build something lasting, one quiet, consistent, fully committed, private choice at a time. That is where everything real begins.